So Emma, before we go live, can you please let us know on the host and panelist chat, just as a warning, so I know.
Are you in New York, Melissa?
I am. And you?
I just got in like yesterday or the night before. Yesterday.
You teaching with the wonderful Anya by chance?
Yes, our first class is Wednesday, so I was just scrambling. Like I can't believe this announcement of Mark Zuckerberg and how quickly Meta has moved.
Oh, your reaction was excellent. I quoted you in a piece I wrote, by the way. Um, it is just, yeah.
Hi, Maria.
Courtney,
Nice to
hello.
see you. Where are you? Are you in New York?
I got
Nice,
in late Monday, so early Tuesday morning.
nice.
Um,
Welcome to winter.
so cold.
Oh, it's freezing.
Um, hey, congratulations on this. But can I just say, I wish you had been more forceful in the action parts.
Hi, Maria. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we'll be starting very soon. I agree. I think the announcements from last week, I think based on that, will be more forceful in the future. We'll have to.
I think we can fall off the cliff really fast. Like the Philippines was 6 months and then our institutions collapsed.
Yeah.
So bleak. Hello, good morning.
Wow.
I'll be quick and bleak. No, not really.
No, but yeah, because the penetration is so huge. People in the Philippines still are just to totally on Meta platforms.
Still, until today, I mean, and my mom is like, trying to get my parents off of it is we
Uh,
can get off of it, and we really should because we know better.
I know I think it's our only hope that people will just get so it was already becoming full of just slop,
Yeah,
and it's
thanks.
like unbearable, I think, for most people. But
Thank you, everyone. I mean, it's all fascinating, but we need to get going.
yes,
And welcome, by the way, Joao and Jalak and Ansgar.
hi,
You all
Joel.
seem visible and
Oh,
audible. So I think we'll get live now. And Emma, just a kind reminder to spotlight speakers' video when they speak. I think that will be helpful. Let's go live. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the first report of the online Observatory on Information and Democracy. We are very excited to see you join in large numbers today. First, I would like to give some very quick housekeeping rules. This session will be live streamed on LinkedIn, so please don't hesitate to share it. Today, we have a very packed agenda, but if you have questions, you can use the Q&A chat, and our panelists will try and address within or after the sessions. Before we present our key findings, I wanted to say that this report is the result of a highly consultative research process that gathered over 400 experts looking at 39 research questions covering mis and disinformation, the media, AI, and data governance, and referencing over 1,600 sources. It's complemented by summaries for different audiences and an interactive library that represents the thematic landscape of the literature analyzed. Our hope is that this global scientific contribution can serve as an interface between the research and policy worlds at a critical time for regulating the digital information space. But now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the chair of the Forum on Information and Democracy and Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders, Thibault Brutin, who will introduce this event. Over to you, Thibault.
thank you, Iris. Thank you all for being here. As said, the agenda is packed, the figures are impressive, and I'd like to say here we are. It's the first major step in a long process, in a long journey to establish, to assess the state of the information ecosystem. It is something that is touching upon some of the core mandate of Reporters Without Borders, the question of journalism, but not only. It also is tied to issues associated with democracy, with the public conversation, the way it can go. And I'd like to say that this coming of the report is really timely, or maybe it is too late. What we're seeing is a backlash disguised as a new framing of the issues by tech platforms, and we need to be, I think, bold in making assessments, in also bridging this gap between the research and public policy, because we know how much reporting and assessments conducted by tech platforms themselves can be instrumentalized in order to enforce or legitimize some of the changes they want to implement. So what you will be seeing today, and I think it's extending from this 1 hour conversation, you need to get into the details of this reporting. The website that's being built by the forums team is amazing in order to get deeper into the content. But what we're doing today is fulfilling the promise of this initial report. Maria, do you remember it? This Declaration on Information and Democracy, made in 2018. I reread it over the weekend, and I can promise you that this is even more relevant today. Some of these ideas that we champion collectively are ideas that are foundational for the work of the forum, but are also extremely valid whenever matters related to information and democracy are discussed. So this is, I would say, the doctrine. This is not the little red book, this is a little white book of the forum. And we need to see how much, from these principles is being enforced today. And that's one of the concerns. One of the ideas that I think is really interesting in this collective effort, and let me praise again the collective effort from the forum, from Robin, from all the academic circles that have contributed to this forum, is this idea of data justice. I think it's an idea we can embrace, we can favor.
Thibaut, you're muted.
Oh, how long have you been muted?
Data justice.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know what happened. So yeah, I think this notion of data justice is really something that I think we can embrace, use as a way to show that it's more than about journalism, and journalists. It's also about the people, the way their data is collected, it's used, and it's shared by tech giants. So let's take back control. This is a first step, and I think I'd like to dedicate this session to Christophe Deloire, who has been the inspiration for the declaration. He has been also the chairman of the forum. He was my friend, my colleague, and I think he would be very proud of seeing this piece of work that we have in front of us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thibaut. Thank you. And now I would love to give the floor to Maria. Maria Ressa, you're a journalist, CEO of Rappler and laureate of the Nobel Peace Prize. Maria, you've also been supporting the forum's work for over 6 years now, and you've been really critical in the prefiguration process of the Observatory. So I'd like to ask you, what is your take on this process, and especially what is your take on the moment we're in also?
Oh my gosh, I promise not to depress you completely. No. But first of all, it has been, we've been working together since Thibaut just said 2017, 2018, when Christophe first called me. And I think this report is probably the most, the framework for it is the most holistic, that gives us points for actions. Okay, really quickly, look, this is my 39th year as a journalist. I can still go to jail for at least 7 years. I have never felt as bleak about the coming year as I do now. Not even when I was the target of an average of 90 hate messages per hour on Facebook in 2016, because the best part of being the target of attack is that you don't have to ask Facebook. You don't have to ask the platforms for data. I build tech. I was a journalist under attack, and I run the business of Rappler in the Philippines. I could see it all. And somehow we in Rappler survived with the help of many of you on this call. Courtney, who worked on this report, Courtney Raj was on the Hold the Line coalition at the bleakest moment when I truly didn't know whether we would survive. People came to help, and I think that's part of what we have to do in this moment. Look, I joke that the Philippines has moved from hell. We're now in purgatory, while the West may just be descending to hell. I really think not enough is said and written about information operations, information warfare, when our biology is hacked by the technology, our emotions twisted for power and money. So what do? Where do we find hope? In action. For years now, I've shown the data in different countries around the world that technology was the match that set the world's dry kindling on fire. Move fast, break things, said Mark Zuckerberg. He said a lot more in the last few weeks, but big tech broke democracy. I learned that the fracture lines of society pounded open are the same regardless of country or culture. The main two are gender and race. Sexism that turns into misogyny, and racism that finds its way into constitutions like in Hungary, where it's called white replacement theory. You'll hear it in the news as immigration or inflation, but dig deeper and you will see gender and race. When I turn on the news, it almost feels like we're already in World War III, from the trenches of Ukraine to the rubble of Gaza and the forgotten battlegrounds of Sudan, Myanmar. I mean, some good news recently, Syria, but those other invisible conflicts around the world. These wars are fought not just with missiles and tanks, but with algorithms, disinformation, and the systemic destruction of truth. That's part of what you will read in the report. It is a thinking, slow process of report. Big tech, first American companies from Silicon Valley, then TikTok from China, transformed social media from a tool of connection into a weapon of mass behavioral engineering. These platforms are not neutral technologies. They're sophisticated systems designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. They monetize our outrage and hate, amplify our divisions, and systematically erode our capacity for nuanced thinking and empathy. These words are far harsher than what you will read in the report, but the report lays out the world's research. In 2018, MIT said that lies spread 6 times faster on social media. You tell a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. And here I say this over and over again: without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we don't have a shared reality, let alone solve existential problems like climate change, the fires in LA. We cannot have democracy. We can't have journalism. The business model of big tech, surveillance capitalism, is built on a fundamental betrayal of human dignity. This is also called out in the report, where data privacy has become a myth and AI and algorithms have cloned and manipulated us, creating echo chambers that exacerbate existing biases, prioritizing conflict over understanding, monetizing human attention at the expense of social cohesion. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate design that brings in hundreds of billions of dollars a year to these companies. In my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I write about how the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, has guided me through my life. It helped define courage for me in a world increasingly shaped by lies. The courage to speak when silence is safer, the courage to build bridges when walls seem easier, and the courage to stand for truth, even when it feels like the entire world is against you. When big tech rewards the worst of who we are, this South African word, Ubuntu, I am because we are, it teaches us that our fates are interconnected, that the fight for truth, justice, and peace is not someone else's battle, it's ours. This report has the world's outputs. It's thorough, it has recommendations, but it's not enough without our collective action. So this is what we have to do. We have to take this study that is there, it's quite long, actually. It's more than 350 pages. But, we now have to take it in this present moment of our shared past. We have to create the future that we want, because, and I say this is it. This time matters. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done, guys. Now we have to move it. Remember, you can move from hell to purgatory.
Thank you so much for such inspiring words, Maria. And indeed, the report is quite thorough and long, but we also have some synthetic documents for different audiences that hopefully will be helpful. I would love to now give the floor to the chair of the Observatory Steering Committee, Courtney Rach, who's also the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty, to open the session on our report's key findings. Courtney, over to you.
Thank you, Iris, and thank you, Maria, as always, for your inspirational, advice, call to action, and for illustrating just why this type of report that we've done is so important, because it is about how all of the information system elements and disinformation and weaponization of information is experienced by courageous individuals like you and others, that this is not just an academic exercise, because it does have very real implications. And I think that's one of the things that really stands out about this report, because we did, and led by the scientific chair, Robert Mansell, who you'll hear from shortly, really incredible job of trying to understand what does the empirical evidence, what do facts and research actually show about what we know about how the information environment operates. And technology platforms are a very important part of that information ecosystem, but it is not only about technology platforms. It's also about the intersection of media systems, and in particular, fact-based media systems and journalism. It is also about the political economy of information and the information infrastructure, the platforms that we use on and offline to communicate and share information. And I think that this report could not come at a more apt time, given the recent announcements by Meta about corporate censorship, which I think Maria and I and many others have for years been arguing that we should look at the intervention and content moderation choices by these platforms as a form of censorship, but also his very disingenuous labeling of the problem being with journalists and fact checkers, as opposed to his own platform. And as Maria rightly alluded to, the design of the business model on which that platform and many others are built. We have seen the kowtowing of billionaire information infrastructure owners, most visibly Trump and Zuckerberg, kowtowing to the new administration and really capturing in a way that we have seen the fusion of political and technical power, specifically the capture of political institutions and the role of this fusion between the corporate actors and power that control our fundamental information infrastructure, whether we're talking about satellites, undersea cables, content platforms, sharing and communication platforms. And so we should be, I think, concerned, and that is why this report that is so evidence-based and comes in here to really understand how are these various components of the information ecosystem interrelated, and how does this kind of cross-cutting theme of disinformation and misinformation, what are the implications for that? And of course, we can't address this issue without acknowledging and figuring out how to fix the accelerating collapse of traditional news media economies that have supported accurate, timely, relevant journalism that ensures that citizens can enjoy their democratic rights and participation. And so in this report, we conduct a comprehensive analysis that reveals a few critical insights that I want to pull out, because there is this tendency to focus on kind of individual level action. You know, we recognize the importance of media and information literacy, but what I think that this report really contributes to is that it underscores how this troubling reality where information ecosystems are predominantly shaped by powerful corporate actors, achieving market dominance through strategic monopolization has led to what we call benign neglect, which undermines the integrity of our information environments. Second, the research emphasizes, again, that digital technologies are not merely driven by technological change. They are deeply influenced by human decisions and power relationships embedded in institutions. And this has significant implications for human rights and democratic participation. So there really is this connection and interconnectivity between these aspects. And so we come up with several policy recommendations for policymakers, and I would also encourage journalists who cover these issues to delve in. First off are, of course, urgent media sustainability and journalism support measures, platform governance reform, which is really critical, including mandatory transparency requirements, independent and regulatory frameworks that address everything from kind of algorithmic amplification to data governance, privacy, and of course, ensuring that these are linked to integrity of elections. This is, of course, important to also, we recommend implement democratic safeguards to ensure that we have mandatory disclosure of platform ownership, the fact-checking infrastructure being an important, though not fully sufficient response. And of course, economic reforms, revenue sharing between platforms and news organization, antitrust actions to break up these monopolies, taxation to make sure that they pay their fair share and internalize the costs of their business. And so with this, these events of just this early in this year have already demonstrated that information ecosystem governance isn't just about abstract principles. And I want to now turn to our panel with my esteemed colleagues, and specifically first turn over to Robin Mansell, the Scientific Director and Professor Emeritus at the London School of Economics, to talk a little bit more about the report's key contributions and findings in relation to these developments. Please, Robin, over to you.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm delighted to finally be able to present this report. It's been around 18 months. It's been a big job. It's been a hugely productive collaborative exercise, not just by me, but by my co-authors and many, many other contributors along the way. I have my slide, please. The report itself is not just something I want to entice you to read because of its size or the scope of its coverage of all of these themes that you can see on this slide. I want to entice you to read it because, as Maria said, it is time to move, and we need an evidence base to move on, and that's what this report tries to provide. Those of you who have joined us today will have very strong views, some of which have been expressed, about why the big tech companies have become and remain so powerful, about how our digital information and communication spaces contribute to democratic instability, about the role of the news media in your countries and what it could be, but isn't, about how AI tools could be developed and used for the public or common good, and about why the collection, processing, and sale of everyone's data for profit is such a big problem for individuals and for societies. The trouble is, it is very, very, very hard to get a full picture of why information ecosystems are challenging for individuals, for adults, for children, for the public sphere, and for democracy. We try in this report to get a better picture of all of these dimensions. The report is very much about the intersections between information ecosystems and democracy and everything else that goes on in between. It's about pathways towards just, equitable, inclusive, safe, and human rights respecting information and human systems. That is so much easier said than done. The report scrutinizes evidence from the global north and the global majority world. And one of the things that it does very crucially is to highlight the Western-centric biases of research and the urgent need to decolonize research. It is the observatory's first attempt on an IPCC climate change type scale to produce a report of this kind, and we've learned a lot along the way. But what we really try to do is to inform and encourage future research that will help provide the evidence for the best actions to resist the power of big tech. And that means that what we provide is guidelines for how to address things that come to the forefront without any warning, like the Zuckerberg this last week. We highlight in this research why research gaps persist, and we assess the strengths and weaknesses of policy and practice. We emphasize what is known about unequal power relations, current market structures, and big tech incentives. But we also look about what is known about governance policies and institutions, but also practices, the implementation of policies, whether they're effective, whether they respect human rights. And finally, we emphasize the need to highlight the agency of individuals and civil society organizations to mobilize the kind of change that is needed. The report shows basically why information ecosystems need to change, because if they don't, there is very little hope for vibrant democratic public spheres. Next slide, please. So how do we go about this? How do we tackle it? First, we emphasize the need to focus on the interdependent components, the people, the practices, the values, the institutions, and technologies. We think this interconnection is very important because it's only by looking at these systems in the round that we understand their complexity, that we understand how they are configured differently in different social, cultural, political, and economic contexts. Second, we examine mis and disinformation both as symptoms of complex changes in societies, wherever you are located, and as amplifiers of these changes. So what this means is that the integrity of information, for better or worse, is treated in our work as only one of many factors that is troubling for democracy. And I think this distinguishes us from people who focus principally on information. Third, we contrast the findings of research on the impacts of technology and mis and disinformation on individual attitudes and behaviors with the insights from research on the structural and institutional unequal power relations in information ecosystems around the world as far as we can. And when we do that, I think we bring to light some issues around the way in which these systems are operated and the power relations that you cannot see if you continuously focus on individual behavioral changes. Next slide. So what are some of the findings? I can only highlight a few, but I want to start first with information ecosystems, a changing public sphere, and human rights and fundamental freedoms. In our report, we emphasize why it is crucial to differentiate between normative universal principles and how these get distorted when they are translated into practice. Second, on exclusion from and inequitable inclusion in information ecosystems, we emphasize how inclusion is resulting in harmful discriminations and how simply modifying filtering systems and algorithms does not address the reasons that outcomes of personalization systems and AI tools are borne disproportionately by different groups. Third, on the topic of media and information literacy and more recently AI literacy training, we stress that as important as this is, literacy training cannot be the main or only answer to mis and disinformation problems. Children and adults should not be left to defend themselves against big tech. Fourth, on information when it's wielded as a weapon, understanding who, including politicians and these days, those close to politicians, who generates mis and disinformation and why, is just as important as understanding its effects on political polarization and outcomes. Fifth, on AI systems, We highlight the need for investigation of the biases, the known biases, and the unknown biases of AI systems. And we do show that content moderation in itself is not about magic bullet response to the problems and the fragility of democracy. We do show that independent fact-checking is an essential component, but again, not the only answer. Our report does speak to contemporary issues. Sixth, on big tech data monetization for profit, we highlight the growing dependence of organizations and individuals on big tech systems. We highlight the weaknesses of current data governance frameworks. We examine why new data governance frameworks are needed. And we examine why various stakeholders are doing what they are doing to reimagine what data justice could be. And crucially, who are some of the actors who are contesting the dominant designs of today's information ecosystems? That's quite a lot, but I could go on longer. I'm going to stop here, but I want to point out that I haven't mentioned our findings about news, media, and trust. Part of the reason is that I think some of our other speakers will be talking about that, but I want to stress that the report makes a strong case for the urgent need to fund, protect, and foster independent public service news media. I finish by saying I'm incredibly proud of the work of all my co-authors, the contributors along the way, and the Observatory's team. It's a start. As Maria said, it's time to move it on, and I fully agree with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's no easy feat to describe and kind of the main findings and issues in this, significant report, but thank you for giving us a great overview. I want to now move to our panelists who were also on the steering committee to hear a bit about some of the key issues that are in the report and a bit of a deeper dive. So we're going to start off with Pierluigi Parsu, Director of the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute. Over to you, Pierre. Please do unmute.
Yeah, I think that, yes, thank you. Let me say that I'm very grateful to have been involved in this major effort. And I think that the title of the report that is about information ecosystem and troubled democracy is the first step that shows one thing, that we have finally discovered that this information crisis and the democracy crisis are moving together. We are facing a double crisis. And we are facing this double crisis in an incredibly rapid transformation, obviously pushed by the digital transformation, but that's something that's really going at the fabric of societies. The chapter of the report that I wanted to underline in a second is the question of what is the role at this moment of the media in this crisis. Well, the first thing is that we are living in a crisis of the trust in the media. As Maria Ressa was saying before, there is a break in the relation of facts, truth, trust. And this break is partially due to the importance and the role of disinformation and misinformation in social media and platforms. And legacy media are unable to contrast this, and probably they were not fit for contrasting this. And there is no any equilibrium, because there is no equilibrium in the information ecosystem, and there is no information in the economics of the information ecosystem. Now we have a new threat that comes from artificial intelligence and is rapid spreading also in the information ecosystem, but at the same time is also a new occasion for an attempt of an equilibrium between producer of reliable content and users of this content. We'll see if this can be, this new equilibrium can reach, and the occasion can be can be got, but the premises are not particularly good. For the moment, we are seeing this crisis going deeper and deeper. So what is the answer to this crisis? The report is not about answer. The report is a research report that obviously gives a lot of leads. I think that one of the things that seems to me that emerges is that we have to recognize that information, particularly professional information and investigative information, the one that controls the powers, market powers, political powers, is a merit good. So it's a good that needs to be defended and financed and sustained, assuming responsibility for this. And who should assume this responsibility? I think that this responsibility should go first to the states, even if the states often are a threat for this, but still, the states are very important for public service media, but they are also important to guarantee the possibility to have journalists that operates freely and without censorship and without repression. And also global institutions should be aware that because the states need to be supplemented and controlled, they should assume an important role in this effort. And finally, I think that, and this report is what it's about, research also should assume its role in guiding to understand what is happening, what is the change that is happening, how can we contrast the change, how can we have a line of response. And I think this report is a useful first step in the direction of helping research and helping policy to understand how to start a response in such double crisis that is so worrisome. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. I think you certainly hit the nail on the head with the importance of research-based and evidence-based public policy and the dual crisis of information and democracy being kind of exacerbated by the digital transformation. And of course, now we are in another transformation as we enter the era of AI. And with this, I want to turn to Askar Cohn, the global AI ethics and regulatory leader at Ernst & Young, to talk a little bit about what the report has to say on AI. Over to you, Ansgar.
Thank you very much. And also as someone who's been engaged in the space around digital information, the role of AI, the role of algorithmic bias, since before I joined EY as an academic as well. I'd like to start off by just saying this, I find this report very valuable because of the breadth of approach that it has taken. It has not pigeonholed sort of the technology aspect as a separate thing from the many other aspects that go into creating a vibrant and democratic information ecosystem. And within the technology space as well, one of the important aspects is the recognition, of course, that AI is not one thing. It comes in many different flavors, and it is impacting our information space in many different ways. Large language models may be attracting a lot of the media attention at this moment, but they are just one aspect of this space. They are contributing a lot of concerning materials. They are facilitating the creation of false information. And of course, they're also impacting the whole question around copyright and how do we provide correct remuneration to those who've done the real work to actually engage with the real world to access the information, as opposed to having all of the revenue flowing to whoever typed in a "please rewrite this in a different, sexier way." But I think more important really in this space is the question around the algorithms that are mediating which information people are seeing, which information is being brought to their attention. And within that space, I think the report also does an important reflection regarding algorithmic bias. And at the core of that is the recognition that all algorithmic systems are biased. There is no such thing as an unbiased algorithmic system. The mere intent of the system to rank, to put something at the top of the list and something lower down the list, implies that the system must be biased because it has prioritized one thing over another. So what we need to be asking is not, please provide me an unbiased system, but rather, please clarify what is the bias profile that has gone into this AI system. What were the decisions that you've made to push certain things to the fore and suppress other things? And really connected to that is the idea that using algorithmic systems does not take away the responsibility for this kinds of decision making. At the core of any of these media platforms is that they must take editorial responsibility for deciding where does which information do people actually get to see. There's a lot more that can be said in this space. I do encourage everybody to please go to the report and to critically question the use of these algorithmic systems. They are needed if one wants to put something out at scale, but we must make sure that the use of an automated system does not diffuse accountability, that we understand where does actually accountability lie for how these systems behave. None of these systems truly autonomously decide how they behave. They behave in a particular way because somebody has decided that that is the type of outcome that they want from these types of systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ansgar. I think very helpful. One of the, as you pointed out, AI is an obfuscating term. And so breaking it down into things like large language models, data, rights is really important. And I think not only does the report show that algorithms are inherently biased, but so are there is no possibility of unbiased AI because it is built from data, and datification is inherently biased, particularly when we think about global South, global majority, global North dynamics, who owns and controls and datifies information. And I think with that, let me turn over to our third panelist, Helani Galpaya, Chief Executive Officer of Learn Asia, a Colombo-based digital policy and research think tank based in emerging economy. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the data governance issues that are covered in the report?
Great. Thank you very much, Courtney. Really happy to be here. I guess I'll make a few points, maybe 4 points. The first is about the actors. I mean, the narrative about large global platforms and large corporates who centralize, monopolize, and then gain economic value from data. This narrative is very true, very relevant, and the report does an amazing job of connecting these dots, both at the micro level, behavioral, and at the macro level, what it means in terms of geopolitics. So just for that reason, it's a wonderful read. But let's not assume that if we miraculously get corporates or companies to behave better through regulation, coercion, self-regulation, other methods, that things are going to improve necessarily. That is a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. Because the other big actor and the biggest roadblock on good data governance and data justice and rights is our governments. And I'm now talking about emerging economies here, particularly in emerging Asia and to some extent in Africa. At the most simple level, I'm talking about governments that don't make essential data public. I'm referring here not to personally identifiable data. I'm talking about really basic stuff like economic indicator and economic indicators and fiscal indicators, for example. How can our journalists do even the basic reportage or fact-checking when even the small data, not the big data, is not available? It's no wonder that sensational news is the norm, that the quality of public debate is poor, and no wonder that most citizens lose trust in media because even the good journalists cannot do their job. So there's a data narrative that's not just about platforms. Now, the platforms amplify these differentials and the problems that this misinformation, rich environments that then spread. So governments is the first point. The second point is that when we look at many South Asian governments, it looks ironically like civil society, journalists, And local journalists and local researchers are the ones who have the toughest time accessing data, even from their government, and data that should be genuinely public. Large global private companies, such as social media platforms or high visibility overseas universities, have repeatedly managed to unlock data that has been collected in the public interest and paid for by public funds in our countries. Google's flood warning model, managing to access through special one-off negotiations in many cases, rain gauge and other weather data from multiple countries, is an example. The weather data that, if it were made open to everyone on an equal level playing field, may result in so many more small and medium-sized companies being created and creating economic value. But at least in that case, we could argue that the early warning of floods that is given by this model comes back to that country that gave the data as a benefit. At least that's the theory. But there are so many other instances where even the benefits of the results of data analysis is not a public good. So the benefits are not even in the public, so that the people who should be benefiting are not. Now, there are two possible explanations for this bad type of action or inaction when it comes to data from our government. One is that is a lack of capacity that many, though not all, majority world countries suffer from. The other is time. That is the differentiated development trajectories in this highly interconnected world. So that brings me to my third point, which is the result of this often low capacity and constant catching up to more developed economies. What does that mean for us? This combination results in emerging Asian and often African countries taking EU Global North data governance models, adopting them without adopting them wholesale with few modifications. So we've talked about EU GDPR as being an example. The first data protection law in Asia was passed in Sri Lanka in response, this is this catching up, to a great extent of the business process outsourcing industry who needed a law equivalent to GDPR in order to keep the business continuing with the mostly EU clientele. Was this the right thing to do? Of course, because we needed those jobs of the outsourced jobs. But where are the skilled lawyers, administrators, and where is the budget to run a meaningful information or data commissioner's office? Or to develop the awareness and skills among our people so that they are able to exercise their rights, know when those rights are violated, and can obtain meaningful recourse. So in under-resourced situations, we really have a problem with data governance models that are not customized. The fourth point is about conflicting objectives in data governance. The speed and capacity problems in data that I referred to in policymaking, conflict sort of highlight the conflict between laws related to data. Obvious examples would be like the right to information versus the privacy laws, right? These are natural, conflict between archival law, national security, civil statistics, and how much they should be public. These are normal, and they are in any society difficult to navigate. In a well-governed country and a well-resourced country, these conflicts can be contested in courts, and there is a system of setting precedents. In ours, and my final point is about digital public.
Palani, I'm so sorry, but we do have to wrap up because we need to get to the next panel. We have panelists that have to leave. But I think, as you're pointing out, this is, all of our panelists have noted this is an invitation to grapple with the complex interplay between infrastructure, media, civil society, public sector, private sector, and exploring these phenomena at both individual, systemic, and national levels suggests, various different types of interventions that, public authorities, platforms, citizens itself have a role to play. With that, let me hand it over to Camille for the next panel. Thank you. And thanks to our panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Courtney. Thanks, everyone. And sorry, Lani, but we are indeed a little bit behind schedule. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us. When we first designed the Observatory on Information and Democracy, we really wanted to build a research to policy interface. And so it was important for us to understand how this landmark report that we're publishing today can feed into policy instruments, would they be at the international or national level. So I'm really pleased today to have with us Melissa Fleming, the UN Undersecretary General for Global Communications, and João Brandt, the Brazilian Secretary for Digital Policies, as well as Alessandro Bellantoni, Director of Policy and Partnerships at the Open Government Partnership. I will start with you, Melissa, from the UN. We've seen that the notion and the concept of information integrity, this priority, has been more and more present at the UN agenda last year, notably with the publication of the Global Principles for Information Integrity, but also through the Global Digital Compact. So I would begin, and maybe it's not such an easy question, but how would you see that, and in what sense do you think that this global meta-analysis, this report that we are publishing today with its breadth, as it has been mentioned, can feed into the efforts that you are promoting at the UN, and what are the next steps also for the Global Principles? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Camille. Great to be here with everyone. We've for a long time at the UN, we have been feeling that, feeling people across the world crying out for a more humane online sphere because they are seeing the effects of a toxic information ecosystem in their societies. We're hearing it from our peacekeepers, from our offices all over the world, that the information environment is also making it so much more difficult for them to, work with governments on resolving inequalities and building democracies, creating more stable societies, convincing people and governments and policymakers to take action around climate change. So what we did find early on is we needed to do something about this ourselves at the UN, that if there could be another SDG, maybe it would be healthy information ecosystems. But there is so little research in most of the world on the impact, evidence-based research. So that's why we're really, really happy to have this evidence-based report, as well as the previous speaker just said, there are many measures that are kind of universal that we recommend, but there's no cookie cutter approach everywhere. So it's really important to have the involvement of the whole world. We are absolutely focused. We do see some optimism that 2024 was the year that info integrity was really, let's say, taken up by the UN and UN organizations, but also the G20. And I'm very glad that João Brandt is here, because under Brazil's leadership, the G20 really put information integrity on the political agenda. And the need to come together, and the community that many of you who are here on the call of academics and fact checkers and civil society and journalists and media have been working for a long time on a healthy information space. I think what we see is the need to pull research together, pull standards together, and to convene. Because in a way, there are more of us than those there are more of us who want facts and science to be accessible and elevated than those who think lies should dominate. However, we are very, very concerned that the platforms are making this challenge and our quest to make our information ecosystems healthier so much worse. And Meta's recent announcement that it will roll back its trust and safety measures, we believe will cause untold harm to our world. We can just predict that hateful content, and in fact, he said it, will surge, and there will be resulting spikes in on and offline harassment and violence. And far from allowing more speech as being the solution to free speech, we believe this will in fact silence speech and also participation. We believe it will shrink civic spaces and also narrow access to information. Social media users will find it harder to access accurate fact-based information. We saw it on X. And it already was not a great space, but it unfortunately is going to get, I'm sure, so much worse. So, leaving it to users to police, we've seen also on X, the use of community notes is slow often. It's haphazard and it's often unreliable, and it's especially unreliable in areas that involve very sensitive issues that have a lot of impact on our societies. So just wanted to say that as a reaction. But again, I think that the UN Global Principles, Camille, thank you for introducing them, for information integrity, that the Secretary General launched in June and that my department put together and is working on rolling out across the world, is a framework that is a framework for all of us, in which a report like yours also will feed into, because it is a framework to guide action for a healthier information ecosystem. And again, you mentioned that a global digital compact was adopted here at the General Assembly, where 193 member states made commitments in that big document to a lot of things, but also to strengthen information integrity. And of course, the next phase now is implementing these information integrity blueprints. We have a lot of interest from our capacities around the world to take it on and to work with civil society and academia and governments that are crying out for UN support. And we also are launching specific initiatives that are issue focused. And I want to point out the example of the Global Initiative for Information Integrity on Climate Change. I'm sure João Brandt will mention this. We launched this together with the government of Brazil and UNESCO at the G20. And we are doing this because we see that existential climate change, and we're seeing this now with the LA fires, the level of mis and disinformation around those fires is burning too. And we really need more information and fact-based information on climate change to be elevated. And so we are building this coalition of governments and civil society to strengthen research and action on climate disinformation ahead of COP30. And also Camille has organized at the upcoming AI summit in Paris that we will be able to have a focus on AI's contribution to climate information integrity there. So yes, we need this research. We need an internet where everyone is able to express themselves freely without fear of attack, and that everybody is able to access a range of views and information sources and not at the mercy of an algorithm they don't control, and not which is not designed to safeguard their interests, instead to steal their data and track their behavior, and to keep them hooked. So the three concrete changes I'd like to leave you with, and I do encourage you to look up the UN Global Principles for Information Integrity. We need to see the most reliable and accurate information be the most accessible. We need users to be empowered over how they can consume information and control their data. And we need transparency around the risks in our information spaces and how content is algorithmically rewarded and monetized. So thank you very much for this report, for this contribution, especially to the work on a global scale. And we look forward to, integrating the findings in this report in the work that we're doing, and to joining forces to make our information ecosystem a bit more healthier, despite all the challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa. You already made quite an introduction and a transition to João Brandt, and to talk about not only the work that Brazil has done on the international level with the presidency of the G20, but also how it reflects at the national level, because one of the key highlights in the report is that all these policies and recommendations should also adapt to different national, regional contexts. On that, Joao, if you'd like to take the floor and tell us a little bit, how do you feel that this report and all the work that has been done can strengthen international cooperation? Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, again.
Well, thank you, Camille. I apologize for, I see my camera is a kind of blurred, but I would say that today is a day of congratulating the Observatory on Information and Democracy. I think this is the key issue. My key message would not be speaking of Brazil, it's speaking of the contribution that you are giving. It's really, really important, useful in practical terms, but also impactful in a time that we have to discuss how democracies should react to the announcement made, but also for all these, the context that you actually draw quite clearly and in a way, quite comprehensive way. I would say that our concern since the beginning of Lula's third administration was to say, we have to do our domestic tasks, but we also have to engage with all the international players and stakeholders that are with the same concerns, with the same perspectives, and the same commitment to freedom of expression, access to information, but also to the sustainable democracies in our times. We're part of the Partnership on Information and Democracy. We did brought the topic to the G20, and for the first time, the topic was in the final declaration, and also not only of the leaders, but in a section, specific section of the Ministerial Declaration of the Digital Economy Working Group. We do have work on media literacy. We do have work on research and development here domestically. But I would say that my main concern is with one aspect. I think new Trump's administration gives a clear signal that they will be together. And this was already, I would say, the second part of Mark Zuckerberg announcement, which is very concerning, is the idea that they will work together to push back, that's the expression that they use, on European Union, Latin America, and other countries that are trying to push for regulation and other measures that create rules. And we're not against social media. We're for social media. We just want them to follow democratic rules, to operate in a way that they can really contribute to the democratic discourse and to democratic debate as they may, as the 50% of the glass full, but we cannot be oblivious to the 50% empty part of the glasses. And I think this becomes at this moment a very relevant task in defending democracies. And our concern is because Mark Zuckerberg's announcement and Trump's connection to, or the invitation to Elon Musk to play a central role in the government kind of predicts a time where these big social media companies won't be willing to respect domestic legislation anymore. We saw that in the last 10 years, I would say, a rise, an increase in their willingness, or let's say, they're accepting national and domestic rules. And we're talking about domestic rules that are democratic, that follow the international standards on freedom of expression and access to information. And they kind of announced that they won't do that anymore. So I think we will have to be together, all the players that have the concern, that want to do and to keep a democratic digital environment that can sustain healthy conversations and information integrity. We'll be together on that. We're all already together in the Global Initiative on Information Integrity for Climate Change. And we'll probably have a meeting in the beginning of February to discuss the steps that we can do in the first semester. But mainly, what I would like to do is to say, let's really be together. This report is a big, huge contribution to this debate, and let's take this task on our hands. I mean, we have to act, and we have to act together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joao, with all these kind words and congratulations. It is indeed quite a challenging time, and I think that the network that we've built, the connection, the individual, professional, sometimes friendship connections that we've built over the past years will be our main strength. I will turn now to Alessandro Berantoni from the Open Government Partnership. In New York in September last year, we participated in the leaders meeting of the OGP, and there was this broad consensus that we need, as a community of practice, to go a little bit beyond the bubble of disinformation experts. And our hope at the forum is that this report, this sort of meta-analysis, can help bring other activists and other fields together as well on this fight for healthier information ecosystems. So my first question would be, do you think that this report can help in that regard? And maybe a second complementary question is also, how can we use the already existing platform that is the OGP and the action plan to really make sure that this work leads then to concrete reforms shaped with the Open Government Partnership? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Camille. And first of all, let me start with congratulating you and your colleagues for this report. I think everybody has underlined its holistic and integrated nature. And I think this is really the feature that is very appealing also for us, because information ecosystem conversations intersect democracy at different levels, in different policies, to different issues, and having a report that brings all of them together, it's hopefully, and we'll make sure that it is the case, an incredibly useful instrument to feed into the domestic reform conversation that the OGP facilitates at national level. So we really want to use it. And we also want to sort of respond to what Maria Ressa was saying at the beginning, that the report is great, but it has to sort of come alive through collective action. And collective action can only take place beyond, I would say, the experts' conversation. In order to have collective action, we need to involve governments, we need to involve civil society, we need to involve journalists, citizens. And this is really what the OGP core business is. We use the principles of transparency, accountability, and citizen participation to shape reforms at domestic level to address exactly the areas that you have highlighted in the report. And if you go on our website, you can see that there are countries that are already working along those lines. So let's say the report is not falling into a vacuum. There is, as you said, consensus that these are the things that need to be done. We have examples from Global North, Global South, from Ghana to Morocco, from Italy to Australia, working on things like human rights and artificial intelligence, or transparency of algorithm, or reforming the press freedom and law to address the challenges that technology is bringing to these fields. So there is work being done, but clearly is not enough. It's not nearly enough. And that is the other aspect that I think our collaboration can bring about. What we have seen in more than almost now 15 years of the OGP is that when many countries keep working on similar reforms, collectively these reforms become a new international standard. We have seen it, for example, in the in the case of beneficial ownership, which, by the way, has also relevance for this work. Many countries started to implement reforms through a OGP action plan to increase the transparency of beneficial ownership. And now we know that there is a sort of an international standard and a rule around it. And then other organizations are taking it and transforming it into a legal instrument at international level. We'd like to do something similar in this field. We would like to really increase the momentum of reforms around these topics so that they become a new global norm. And this is also the other aspect that I think is complex, but also relevant to our potential collaboration, our future collaboration. Action has to happen at domestic level, but these phenomena are transnational. So we need to keep the two aspects always in mind. We want to have reforms that governments and civil society co-create and implement, but we also know that this is not enough. This has to be transformed into global action. And I think your report does that, shows the connections, shows how these things are, these problems are domestic, have an impact on the quality of democracy at domestic level, but also cannot be tackled without a global movement and norms and standards. So I think what we would like to continue doing is to be part of this movement, to activate citizens and civil society at both global and domestic level, and push for more attention, especially on the interlinks between all the nice analysis that you have done, but also their much less nice impact on the quality of our democracies.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Thanks for the brevity of your remarks. We are again a little bit behind schedule, so I'll be brief for the transition. But it feels like we've already achieved a lot with the report, but that we still have much more to do. So we'll do our best, count on us to promote this report in different settings throughout different international processes at the national, regional, global level. So thanks a lot again to Melissa, Joel, and yourself, Alessandro, for joining us today and to have these discussions. And I will now pass it on to Sonia Solomon for the last session that will focus on future investigation based on the conclusion of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. So good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. It's been a real privilege to be part of the steering committee for this very significant and massive undertaking and to moderate today's discussion. I'd like to just open by kind of reminding us that as we navigate the challenges of this increasingly complex and rapidly evolving information ecosystem, it's really clear that our research agendas must adapt to meet the demands of the moment, and one that feels particularly charged, as many of us have voiced today. Meta's recent decision to end fact-checking, for instance, sort of underscores both, I think, the importance as well as the limitations of current approaches to safeguarding information integrity. At the same time, I think we see how the broader platform ecosystem is being shaped by vested political interests in fairly explicit and maybe unprecedented ways. And yet, I think this also reminds us to stress one of the report's key findings, which is that research has to move beyond this assumption that technological change alone drives the use and the impact of digital technologies. So instead, I think we need to explore, the reciprocal connections between technology and society. And these are really woven throughout the report, as Robin outlined earlier and others earlier today. And our panel really kind of offers an opportunity to unpack some of these in specific detail. And I think part of the reason the report was so successful in moving beyond this kind of default assumption was its intentional focus on the concept of information ecosystems, which really allows for this broader framing and the inclusion of such diverse and wide-ranging research that are incorporated in the report. And then also invites us to analyze these broader power structures that we can dig into in today's panel, right? The social, political, and economic that shape these systems, rather than sort of focusing narrowly on individual platforms or technological changes. So I'll just highlight two critical gaps in the research landscape that were found by the report before we turn to our panelists. Access to data remains a significant barrier for researchers, especially in the global majority world. So addressing this will require, things clear data disclosure policies, safe harbor for researchers, and public data infrastructure frameworks. And secondly, studies from the global north continue to dominate across these disciplines. So decolonizing research is really essential to ensure that policy and practice are informed by the experiences of the global majority world. So on this point, I'll turn to our first panelist, Jalak Kakar, Executive Director, Center for Communication Governance at the National Law University of Delhi, who can help us ground our conversation in this exact kind of research bias raised in the Observatory's report. So why is centering the global majority's experience essential to creating scholarship and policies that, actually reflect the diverse realities of our information ecosystems?
Thanks for that. I think this report does an excellent job of pointing to the imbalance between global north and global majority research and how the research actually tends to predominantly favor viewpoints and conclusions coming out of the global north. And the reason why it's really important that global majority perspectives are highlighted and integrated into academic, public discourse, policy discourse is because a large proportion of the world's population stays in the global majority, and a significant proportion of them face significant harms. We have authoritarian governments, we have democracies, we have a wide variety of governments and types of governments across the global majority. And we need to take into account the unique experiences, social, political, economic contexts of these countries. I think, one of the things that's very clear is that there's not a lot of research funding that's available in the global majority to undertake this kind of work. A lot of the funding gets channeled, to North America, Europe. But an interesting trend that I've sort of been observing is in the last year to 18 months is a lot of funders have woken up to the need for global majority policy research and scholarship. But this money is getting challenged to institutions in, again, North America and Europe to conduct research on the global majority rather than being channeled to institutions that work very closely on these issues within the global majority. We've seen universities putting out calls for papers and, research notes. And again, there'll be some honorarium, but that money and the opportunity goes to researchers working on these issues, sitting within the global north. I think, Sonia talked about the fact that researchers based in the global majority are very often not getting researcher access to, platform data. And that's problematic because while there is some research coming out of the global north, based on researcher access that, sometimes gets provided, the reality is that in the global majority, the experience may be very different. And until researchers sitting in the global majority are able to look at this data and make sense of it, we don't know what policy tools and mechanisms are truly needed to appropriately tackle the challenges we are seeing in the global majority. I think the other thing that we need to account for is the fact that a lot of forums where major decisions are being taken around building principles, say around transparency and accountability of platforms or around AI norm building, is again happening primarily in the global north and informed by global north research without adequate participation from the global majority, either because they are not invited into those rooms or because there aren't resources available to bring these perspectives into the, and to have these people participate in these conversations. And then that further feeds into the availability of academic research coming out of these areas. So I want to, close out by talking about that, transparency and accountability is key. And I think one of the things we have to be talking about in the global majority and conducting more research on is what transparency and accountability measures can be built into governance mechanisms, what civil society can push for within these contexts to ensure that we are holding distant platforms accountable, and there are clear interventions that are articulated to mitigate the harms of misinformation and disinformation that we are seeing emerge, whether it is about AI use on social media platforms or in the generative AI context, and pushing for further transparency and accountability around these systems.
Thank you. I'll take this moment to highlight that out of, I believe, 1,654 resources of the Observatory's report, we had a 22% representation of Global South perspectives, which I think is kind of an important step in this direction. Zhalak, your emphasis on inclusivity in scholarship and access to reliable data and information raises important questions for how foundational institutions like journalism remain resilient and representative. So I'll turn to Jeanette Hoffman, Research Director of the Alexander von Humboldt Institute for Internet and Society. Perhaps you can expand on this by examining the threats to professional journalism, including the collapse of traditional business models.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sonia. I'd like to address mis and disinformation and what the report suggests governments can do about it. First of all, one needs to emphasize that mis and disinformation is a very complex issue, and it is not clear that we always talk about the same thing when we use this terminology. And this is one of the major reasons why, as yet, there is no consensus among people doing research about this area, what the principal reasons are for its growth and how we should actually best tackle this problem. Despite that, the report makes some really valuable recommendations, offers some guidance for policymakers who want to address disinformation. The report acknowledges for good reasons that it's not easy for countries to actually address this issue because we have these large platforms, the social networks that are usually outside the regulatory reach of many policymakers. And this is particularly an issue for small countries, which often struggle to regulate IT companies that seem so much more powerful than themselves. So one step that governments can take to protect, for example, the national media landscape, is to collaborate with other countries in the same area. And Latin America seems to be one good example where several countries collaborate on regulatory policies to tackle disinformation. An important issue for all countries also is the structural asymmetry between legacy mass media and digital media. The legacy media are often losing out against social networks, particularly among the young generation. But on the other hand, we know that professional journalism is an important pillar to ensure an informed public for the future. And it seems a robust professional journalism is also one of the best means to actually combat disinformation. So one possibility in this field is indeed a ban on discriminating news content on social networks. My own country, Germany, has pursued this strategy, but like so many policies, implementation is still lacking. So compliance of social networks is not easy to achieve. But of course, there's more that governments can do to protect media freedom and combat disinformation. One point is to strengthen legislation to ensure political independence of the media. This does not only concern private newspapers, but also the protection of public broadcasting media by ensuring that financing is decoupled from the political orientation of the government. In many countries, we see, paradoxically, on the one hand, such an increase on information, and at the same time that traditional media struggle to defend their political and financial independence. But it's also important to have supervisory authority in place to hold government's media policy to account. In the long run, however, and Sonia mentioned this already, it seems that we need new business models for professional journalism to survive. It is, I think, the double responsibility of governments to protect the independence of the media, but simultaneously provide the conditions that allow professional journalism to survive. The report does not talk about how this can be achieved, but there are proposals out there that would suggest redistributing the enormous advertising revenues between platforms and legacy media. Finally, the report encourages investigations of the actors and institutions that generate mis- and disinformation and their motivations. The sources and motives of disinformation tend to be neglected by policy measures that primarily aim to mitigate harms on the individual level. One reason for this blind spot might be that one of the relevant sources of disinformation nowadays is the political elite itself. This is particularly true for democracies that are at a tipping point towards becoming a liberal democracies or even autocracies. In these countries, we can observe that governments themselves have become important sources of disinformation. This is why we also need a strong civil society that helps combating disinformation, because we cannot simply rely on governments to do that on our behalf. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this really, the question of business models brings up a question from our audience members that sort of highlights another way in to protecting information integrity through anti-monopolistic and competition laws, which is certainly not unprecedented. And certainly the EU has incorporated this approach to their legislative package. But Jeanette, your insights to mis and disinformation really bring questions of, I think, local resilience to the fore as well, and how these are challenged by the decline in the shifting landscape. So Admar Mare, as an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Media at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, can you shed some light on how media resilience and local realities, particularly in Africa, kind of intersect with these challenges that we've discussed?
Thank you so much, Sonia. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this important launch, and thank you so much to everyone who has spoken before me. Certainly, I think this report is very pertinent and it raises very fundamental issues that also affect the media and information landscape in Africa and more broadly. But what I just want to start by saying is that like all other media houses across the globe, the African media landscape has also been affected by a lot of digital disruptions that have come into our shows over the last couple of years. And I think this has also complicated the business model. One thing that has come to the fore for us who do research in this kind of space is that we have realized that the old is dying, but the new cannot be born. Here I'm talking about the old business model, but the new business models are not really coming to the fore. And I think this has actually created a situation where we have seen a lot of media sustainability challenges. For example, in South Africa, in the last couple of months, we have seen big media companies actually laying off workers, but also telling us that they are going to be stopping publishing a number of newspaper titles and also magazines going into the future. We have also seen other media houses in Kenya, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Namibia struggling to pay their workers on time. But also we have also seen another issue that has also become very pertinent, where journalists are also targeted online harassment on social media platforms. And again, this has also created a situation where media resilience is really under attack. And my argument here is to say that a fragile media ecosystem is also leading to a fragile democratic dispensation. And we have seen a lot of coups that have happened in West Africa. We've also seen a number of media capture that has also happened in various, political and also economic systems in Africa. For example, in other countries where you have seen politicians coming to bail the media houses that are struggling because they say they have the money to actually, but when they do that, they actually, also, affecting the media independence, but also affecting the media freedom in that particular, ecosystem. So we are increasingly seeing a situation where, because the new cannot be born, new actors are coming into the ecosystem, trying to bail out media, but not for public interest purposes, but rather for their own political interest, rather for their own profit or interest, and that has created a situation where, again, these people also control narratives also on social media through hiring troll farms, but also hiring cyber troops that can actually target journalists. So we are increasingly seeing a situation where in Africa, the journalists are actually struggling offline and online. So in that kind of a situation, I think we really need to see a lot being done to hold platform companies to account, but also to hold those that are in power to account, because in a country or in a situation where we have weak civil society, the government of the day, but also those that are in power can actually abuse their power and also use it to inform different kinds of narratives. So what I'm saying is that the local realities in Africa paint a situation where we really need to make sure that we invest more in making sure that there's transparency in terms of how social media companies work, but also there's also need to make sure that these platform companies do not just to priority markets. So in Africa, we've got literally 3 or 4 priority markets for social media companies. They would rather listen to the South African government. They would rather listen to the Kenyan government. They would rather listen to the Egyptian government. They would also rather listen to the Nigerian government. Why? Because these are for them priority markets. Any other country out of these 54 countries, literally 50 countries, they are not really priority markets. They will see them as marginal markets that don't really need much of attention. So really, going forward, we really need to make sure that there is more accountability at the level of how big platforms actually operate in Africa, but also in other global majority countries. So let me stop there because I know that we are actually running out of time.
Thank you so much. Natalia, Suso, you've authored multiple works on this, and certainly as the director of the Salto Agency and through your work with UNESCO, maybe you can talk us through this need for accountability and transparency from these global tech companies that we've all highlighted.
Yes, thank you, Sonia. So I think it's very complex, the interdependency of factors that harm information integrity. So we sometimes don't know where to start. I think one of the greatest merits of this report is that help us separate the wheat from the chaff to better understand and take action in favor of people. On the other hand, I think the power asymmetry between governmental actors and monopolistic businesses, especially in big tech, presents an additional challenge to the solutions. Because how can policies be effective when political power is weighted precisely by these increasingly fragile democracies that result from concentrated actors and their democratic practices? In the case of big tech, we also face significant gaps, as mentioned, in transparency, accountability, as well as regulatory efforts that even backtrack on previously established agreements, as we saw last week with Meta. So this undermines both institutions, public institutions and private institutions, and it's leading us to a fragmented and protectionist internet that respond only to its own interests in tandem with governments. So that's exactly the opposite of we should aim for. So I thought of 3 actions that are working now and could work better, and the report help us in this way to understand and to address our experience. First, investigate and monitor human rights violations by platforms systematically, mainly to report what's happening as an initial step. In which populations are changes in content moderation having the most negative impacts? Which voices are being silenced in which countries with conflicts? it's sure data is crucial for making informed decisions in transparency, accountability, and remedies for violations in people's rights. However, I think we need to present this data as evidence of human rights violations, because evidence-based policies are not sufficient alone in the actual balance of power. I think in today's context that the report addresses, we must denounce and create consensus saying this is a global scale human rights issue, as we have been doing, but louder and collectively. I think, as said, it's sometimes seen that since our regions, my region, Latin America, but other colleagues' regions, still lack of regional governance mechanisms in digital, it seems that these issues are not important for us, but it's not. We are the most affected. We care deeply. It's just that we don't have global north resources, and we need more resources to investigate, for research, for taking action. The second action, I think is very important, is to persist in co-regulation and multi-actor governance approaches, as mentioned right now by OCP. These are more costly actions in terms of reaching consensus, implementing actions, but I think that as noted in last week, these are the only viable alternative for sustainable and democratic solutions. Without effective involvement of stakeholders in decision making, I think agreements are easily to dismantled. And again, participation of the global majority and affecting minorities is still very limited in these models. I think global north must allocate sustained economic and institutional efforts to balance this power and integrate the efforts. The third action, regulation alone is not enough. We must urgently develop and support alternative models for platforms, aligned with data justice, no discrimination, protection of public discourse. I think regulatory efforts remain incomplete unless alternative communication frameworks are created. Because given of the deeply mediatization of societies, if we do not create that alternative frameworks for communication, we'll be stuck. And even if the current platforms are harmful. Yes, one last idea. The report is very important, saying we may think in reverse. We must question not only the decisions previously made by platforms, but also by political overlook issues because of techno-optimism or to avoid over-regulating over innovation. I think the reports straighten on that the alternative is not always private monopolies versus suffocating state regulation. There's space to make collective decisions that lie in the middle, that are effortless, but are in the middle. So the report greatly helps on that and is very welcome for this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to all of our panelists for their insightful contributions and all of you for being part of this thoughtful discussion. Many of us have echoed, Maria Ressa's earlier call for collaboration, and many of us clearly know how challenging collaborations are at this global scale. But I think today's event and the launch of this report are a real testament to their realization. So I hope we can continue to use the open and collaborative approach of this process that the Observatory has enabled. So despite discussion of all of these challenges, I'm leaving on a hopeful note before I pass back to Iris.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you to all our panelists. I'm really sorry that we are delayed, and it's never pleasant to usher people to wrap up, especially with such interesting insights. So thank you so much for all of those who contributed. I won't be long. I just want to emphasize that this truly has been a highly collaborative piece of work. So I thank everyone, and I recommend you, I invite you to have a look at the report, and hopefully everyone who has contributed in some shape or form is listed in the acknowledgements, so you can have a look at that too. So I just wanted to say that this is only the sort of kickstart of what we hope to be a very engaging process. We are planning a lot of activation events all across the world, and this is only in the next sort of 3 months. So, you know, like stay tuned for more. Also, let us know if you're interested in highlighting the results of the report within your communities in some shape or form. We can be in touch. We are very open to more collaboration, and I just want to thank everyone for staying with us and participating. And let's not be strangers. I hope we see each other soon. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.